In the winter of 1924, only months before his death, Harry Houdini received a letter that disturbed him enough to keep it hidden from almost everyone around him. It came from a widow living alone in Boston, and according to her, every evening at dusk, her mirror stopped reflecting her house correctly. At first, the changes were small. The room inside the glass looked brighter than reality. The walls seemed farther apart. The fireplace appeared slightly different, easy things to dismiss. Until one evening, the reflection disappeared completely, and in its place stood a long marble hallway lit by pale white light. At the far end of the hallway, someone was standing there, watching her. The woman blamed grief at first. Her husband had died during the pneumonia outbreaks after the Great War, and since then the silence inside the house had become unbearable. Some nights she caught herself listening for footsteps she knew would never return, so she convinced herself exhaustion was affecting her mind, until the hallway kept returning, every evening, always at dusk. And according to the letter, each night the figure appeared slightly closer. Imagine living with that. Imagine sitting alone in a darkening room while the reflection across from you slowly stops belonging to your world. The woman lasted nearly 3 weeks before finally wrapping the mirror in blankets and mailing it directly to Harry Houdini in New York. Nobody knows what happened to that mirror afterward. But years later, hidden among Houdini's private papers, researchers discovered a single sentence written shortly after it arrived. "I no longer believe these people are imagining what they see." That sentence mattered because Houdini built his career exposing lies. He humiliated fake mediums on crowded stages, destroyed fraudulent seances, exposed spirit photographers who preyed on grieving families desperate to believe death was not truly the end. Publicly, Houdini mocked supernatural claims constantly, but privately, the truth was more complicated. Because after the death of his mother, Cecilia, something inside him changed. Friends later admitted Houdini quietly spent years searching for proof that consciousness might somehow survive death. Not publicly, never publicly, but late at night, alone in hotel rooms after performances, he still read letters from strangers describing impossible experiences. And by 1924, those letters had become impossible to ignore, because they were no longer arriving one at a time. They came from Boston, Chicago, Providence, Philadelphia, widows, teachers, war veterans, people who had never met each other. Yet their stories sounded disturbingly similar. They all described antique mirrors, usually manufactured before the 1880s, and always the same pattern. The reflections changed during moments of uncertain light, dawn, dusk, storms. And inside those altered reflections, people claimed they saw places that did not belong to their reality. Long white hallways, stone archways, massive towers rising somewhere beyond pale haze. Sometimes figures moved quietly through the reflections, never transparent, never ghost-like, solid, real, as though the mirrors were no longer reflecting rooms but somewhere else entirely. At first, Houdini dismissed the stories. Old mirrors distort reflections. Grief affects perception. Loneliness changes the mind. Those explanations should have been enough, until one detail kept haunting him. Strangers across America kept describing the same places. One widow described a marble staircase beneath enormous windows. Weeks later, a retired railroad conductor in Ohio described the exact same staircase without knowing her story existed. A school teacher in Boston sketched distant towers glowing beneath pale morning light. Months later, another witness in New York described nearly identical towers from memory. Again, and again, and again, the same places kept appearing. That was the detail Houdini could not explain, because hallucinations vary, memory varies, imagination varies, but these stories repeated too precisely. And for the first time in his life, Harry Houdini began wondering something deeply dangerous. What if these people were telling the truth? If you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to Forgotten Echoes. And before we go deeper into tonight's mystery, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? And what time is it there right now? Because this story begins in an America drowning in grief after the Great War. Families across the country sat beside empty dinner tables that would never feel whole again. Sons disappeared in trenches overseas. Husbands never returned home. Influenza swept through cities before families had even finished grieving the war itself. And in that silence, people became desperate to believe death was not truly the end. Spiritualist churches filled every week. Mediums packed candle-lit parlors. Newspapers printed advertisements promising communication with lost loved ones. Some people truly believed. Others simply missed the people they had lost too much to let go. Houdini understood that pain better than most people realized, which was why he became deeply fascinated when strange rumors started spreading through spiritualist circles in New York and Chicago. Not about ghosts, about mirrors, particularly mirrors manufactured before the Civil War. According to the stories, certain reflections behaved strangely at dusk. Rooms appeared different. Furniture shifted slightly. Hallways appeared where walls should have been. Most people dismissed the stories immediately. But then, during the spring of 1923, a woman named Eleanor Whitmore waited outside one of Houdini's Chicago performances for nearly 2 hours just to speak with him privately. At first, Houdini assumed she wanted help exposing a fake medium. Instead, she told him about her grandmother's mirror, a tall walnut mirror manufactured sometime before the Civil War. Eleanor explained that every evening just before darkness settled outside, the reflection became subtly wrong. The room inside the glass looked brighter than reality. The walls appeared farther apart. Then one evening, she saw people walking behind her in the reflection, people who were not inside the house. She turned immediately. Nobody there. But inside the mirror, they continued walking calmly through the room as though she could not see them at all. When Eleanor finished speaking, Houdini reportedly asked her only one question. "Had you recently lost someone?" Eleanor lowered her eyes. Her younger brother had died in France during the war. That answer stayed with Houdini afterward, because by then he had already started noticing a pattern. Nearly everyone reporting strange mirror experiences carried some form of deep emotional loss, and for a while, Houdini convinced himself that explained everything. Grief changes perception. Loneliness distorts reality. That explanation comforted him, until the summer of 1924, because that was the year Harry Houdini reportedly saw the reflection himself. According to notes later discovered among his belongings, the incident happened inside a hotel room in Montreal. Late evening, rain sliding softly across the windows, and standing across from Houdini, an antique mirror older than the American Civil War. At first, nothing seemed unusual. The reflection showed the room exactly as expected. The lamp beside the bed, the wallpaper, the rain outside. Then slowly, the reflection began changing, not suddenly, gradually enough that Houdini almost convinced himself it was exhaustion. The light inside the mirror appeared brighter than reality. The walls stretched farther apart. The ceiling rose slightly higher. Then the room disappeared completely. In its place stood a massive corridor lined with pale stone archways fading into the distance. At first the corridor appeared empty. Then movement. Human figures crossing somewhere far away. Solid figures, not transparent, not ghost-like, real. Houdini reportedly froze and imagined that moment for a second. The man who spent his entire life exposing illusions, standing alone in a dark hotel room, while the reflection across from him quietly stopped belonging to his world. According to Jim Collins, Houdini eventually stepped closer toward the mirror, and the instant he moved, everything vanished. The hotel room returned exactly as before. The lamp, the walls, the rain, all normal again. But according to Collins, what frightened Houdini most was not the reflection itself. It was how real it felt, not dreamlike, not blurry, real. That single experience changed him completely. After Montreal, the investigation stopped being curiosity. It became obsession. Houdini quietly traveled between Boston, Providence, Philadelphia, and New York, speaking with antique dealers, historians, and former spiritualists. But he avoided publicity carefully. He did not want newspapers involved. Because the more he investigated, the less the phenomenon resembled ghost stories, and that realization disturbed him deeply. According to one surviving notebook entry, Houdini eventually wrote, "These reflections do not feel supernatural. Then beneath it, they feel historical." That sentence marked the moment everything changed. Because if the mirrors were not showing spirits, then what exactly were people seeing? Houdini started studying old mirror manufacturing methods obsessively. Premise 1,880 mirrors had been made differently than modern glass. Mercury-backed surfaces, silver nitrate coatings, hand-polished imperfections impossible to perfectly recreate later. And strangely enough, many of the mirrors connected to sightings entered America through the same northeastern trade routes during the mid-1800s. Boston, Providence, New York, Philadelphia. That detail bothered him constantly afterward, but another detail disturbed him even more: the architecture. Witnesses kept describing places that did not resemble ordinary American cities from the 1800s. The buildings sounded too massive, too elegant, too clean: wide boulevards, white stone structures, domes and towers glowing beneath pale light. Not one witness described muddy roads or crowded industrial streets common during that era. Instead, they described cities that felt strangely peaceful, almost beautiful in a way difficult to explain. And every witness described the same emotional feeling afterward: not terror, longing, as though the reflections showed a place they somehow missed without understanding why. Then another letter arrived. This one came from Providence, Rhode Island. The writer claimed she had managed to sketch part of a structure visible inside her mirror before the image disappeared. Houdini traveled there personally 2 days later, because according to her description, the sketch contained something he believed he had already seen once before, inside the Montreal reflection. A massive tower rising above the distant skyline, wide at the base, narrow near the top, and glowing faintly beneath morning light like polished metal. When Houdini finally saw the drawing in person, he reportedly went silent, then quietly asked the woman a question she never forgot. "Did the people inside the reflection ever notice you watching them?" The woman hesitated before answering, then softly whispered, "Yes, only once." And according to her, that was the moment she stopped standing near the mirror after sunset forever. That answer stayed with Houdini, because until then he still wanted to believe the phenomenon was only perception, only grief, only loneliness distorting the human mind. But if the people inside the reflections could see the witnesses too, then the entire mystery became something far stranger and far more dangerous. The woman from Providence refused to describe that final evening at first. She kept glancing toward the covered mirror standing silently in the corner of the room, as though speaking about it too openly might somehow bring it back again. Outside, rain tapped softly against the windows. Inside, the house felt unnaturally still, and Harry Houdini simply waited. Eventually, the woman spoke. Her name was Margaret Hale, widowed since 1919. The mirror had belonged to her mother before her, and according to family records, it had been manufactured in New York sometime around 1864. For years, nothing about it seemed unusual. Then during the spring of 1924, the reflection began changing. At first, only small details appeared wrong: the lighting softer, the room slightly larger, a doorway wider than it should have been. Easy things to dismiss. Until one evening, the reflection shifted completely. Margaret said she no longer saw her sitting room at all. Instead, she saw an enormous outdoor plaza surrounded by white stone buildings glowing beneath soft golden light. Trees lined a wide boulevard stretching into the distance. And unlike previous sightings, the people inside the reflection were finally close enough to see clearly. Men and women carrying books beneath their arms, walking calmly beside fountains, crossing open courtyards. No one appeared frightened. No one hurried. The place felt peaceful, almost impossibly peaceful. Then one of the figures stopped walking. A man standing beside a fountain slowly turned toward her and looked directly back, not through her, at her. Margaret described the feeling that followed as the coldest moment of her life, not because the man looked threatening, because he looked surprised, as though he could see her too. The figure reportedly took one slow step closer before the reflection suddenly collapsed back into her ordinary sitting room. No broken glass, no sound, just reality returning all at once. When Margaret finished speaking, Houdini reportedly asked her only one question. "Did he seem afraid?" Margaret shook her head slowly. "No," she whispered. "He looked sad." That answer disturbed Houdini more than any ghost story ever could, because sadness implied awareness, and awareness implied something far stranger than hallucination. Before leaving Providence, Houdini asked permission to examine the mirror personally. Margaret agreed under one condition. He could not stay after sunset. When Houdini asked why, she hesitated before admitting something she had told nobody else. After that final experience, she started hearing movement inside the reflection at night. Not voices, not whispers, footsteps. Soft footsteps crossing marble floors somewhere beyond the glass. Houdini said nothing after hearing that. But later that evening, according to notes recovered among his papers, he returned to his hotel deeply shaken. That same night he wrote, "These accounts no longer resemble superstition." Then beneath it, "The consistency is too precise." After that point, the investigation changed completely. Houdini stopped treating the reports as isolated experiences and began comparing them systematically. Dates, lighting conditions, manufacturing origins, emotional states of witnesses, and slowly patterns emerged. Nearly every major incident occurred during moments of uncertain light, dawn, dusk, storms, and almost every witness had experienced profound emotional loss beforehand. Widows, parents, veterans, people emotionally exhausted by grief. For a while, Houdini convinced himself that explained everything. Maybe grief altered perception. Maybe loneliness weakened the mind. That explanation comforted him, until another witness changed everything again. In January of 1925, a retired architect from Hartford named Samuel Ritter contacted Houdini privately after hearing rumors about the investigation. Unlike most witnesses, Samuel openly despised spiritualism. He mocked seances, hated mediums, and insisted immediately that he did not believe in ghosts. That caught Houdini's attention instantly, because if even men like Samuel were experiencing the phenomenon, then the explanation became much harder to dismiss. According to Samuel, everything began after purchasing a large standing mirror during an estate sale in Albany. The mirror dated back to approximately 1851. Within weeks, strange distortions began appearing inside the reflection during early mornings. But unlike previous witnesses, Samuel focused less on the people and more on the architecture. As an architect, he recognized something deeply wrong about what he was seeing. The buildings inside the reflection displayed engineering techniques that should not have existed during the mid-1800s. Massive unsupported spans, perfectly cut stonework, domes larger than most American structures of the era. Samuel spent weeks sketching the buildings before comparing them against architectural records. Nothing matched. Not New York, not London, not Paris. Nothing. The closest resemblance came from temporary World Fair structures built decades later, but even those looked crude compared to what appeared inside the mirrors. Houdini traveled to Hartford within days. Sketches covered Samuel's dining room table, wide boulevards, stone terraces, domes, towers disappearing into pale haze, and once again the same emotional atmosphere appeared throughout every drawing. The city did not feel ruined or haunted, it felt alive. That detail haunted Houdini afterward, because if these were visions of the dead, why did everything appear so ordinary? Why did the cities look inhabited? And why did strangers across America keep describing the same place without ever meeting each other? Before leaving Hartford, Houdini finally asked Samuel the question that had quietly grown in his mind for months. "When you looked into the mirror," he asked softly, "did it feel like you were seeing the past?" Samuel answered immediately, "No." Then after a long silence he added, "It felt like I was seeing somewhere that still exists." That answer stayed with Houdini long after he left Hartford, because from that point forward, his notebooks changed tone completely. He stopped using words like illusion, hallucination, or imagination. Instead, new phrases began appearing across the pages: parallel reflection, residual environment, unknown continuity, and perhaps most disturbing of all, possibly observing rather than remembering. By the summer of 1925, Houdini had gathered enough witness accounts to fill several notebooks, but one pattern now frightened him more than anything else. Nearly every mirror connected to the phenomenon had passed through the same northeastern trade routes during the mid-1800s: Boston, Providence, New York, Philadelphia, and according to shipping records Houdini obtained privately. Many originated from a single forgotten importer operating along the Rhode Island coast before the Civil War, a company that vanished completely from records in 1868. No bankruptcy, no closure notice, no explanation, just gone. Then hidden inside one surviving customs document, Houdini discovered a phrase he reportedly underlined 3 separate times: reflective materials received from Eastern territories. After reading that line, he became obsessed with tracing the origins of the mirrors. And according to Jim Collins, this was when Houdini truly began changing. He slept less, became quieter, more suspicious. Sometimes during train rides he stared silently into darkened windows as though expecting something to appear beside his reflection. Then in November of 1925, another letter arrived. This one was different. No frightened widow, no grieving family, no emotional story. The envelope carried no return address. Inside sat a single typed paragraph. The writer identified himself only as a former curator. The message read, "You are asking the wrong question. The mirrors do not create the visions. They reveal what already exists beside us. Stop looking for ghosts. Start looking for intersections." That word disturbed Houdini deeply. Intersections. Because by then, witnesses were no longer describing simple reflections. The experiences were becoming interactive. A schoolteacher in Baltimore claimed a woman inside the mirror dropped a stack of papers after noticing her watching. An elderly pianist in Boston reported hearing faint music that did not exist anywhere inside his apartment. And a collector from Maine insisted one altered reflection remained visible nearly 4 full minutes before fading, long enough for him to sketch part of the skyline. That sketch later ended up among Houdini's private papers. It showed enormous domed buildings connected by elevated walkways stretching above tree-lined streets, and near the edge of the drawing stood the same structure witnesses described again and again. The tower, massive, geometric, almost metallic beneath pale morning light. Nobody could identify it. But once Houdini began comparing witness sketches side by side, he realized something deeply unsettling. The tower always appeared in roughly the same direction, far west, visible through haze, sometimes partly hidden by clouds or early sunlight, but always there, watching over the city like a landmark every witness somehow recognized emotionally without understanding why. By early 1926, Houdini's notebooks reportedly contained more than 80 separate accounts connected to antique mirrors. 80 unrelated people, describing the same impossible world. That consistency disturbed him more than the mystery itself, because hallucinations vary, memory varies, human imagination varies, but these accounts repeated the same architecture, the same atmosphere, the same strange emotional feeling, again and again and again. Then in March of 1926, Houdini reportedly met privately with a Columbia University professor named Walter Green. Green specialized in optics and early electrical experimentation. According to surviving notes, Houdini showed him witness sketches, technical information about old mirror manufacturing, and several written testimonies. Green dismissed supernatural explanations immediately, but one theory interested him: Mercury. Premonus 1880 mirrors often used mercury-backed silvering techniques later abandoned because of instability and toxicity. Green speculated that under rare atmospheric conditions, unusual reflective distortions might theoretically occur. At first, Houdini seemed relieved hearing a scientific explanation, until Green admitted something else. Optical distortions should not produce identical imagery across unrelated witnesses. Hallucinations vary. Human imagination varies. But the reports Houdini collected repeated the same environments too precisely. The same towers, the same white stone structures, the same emotional atmosphere, and occasionally the same people. That final detail reportedly unsettled Green enough that he ended the meeting early. But before leaving, he told Houdini something Collins later remembered word for word. "If your witnesses are telling the truth, then someone may be observing us at the same time." That sentence followed Houdini afterward like a shadow, because by then, he had privately experienced something he told almost nobody. Something from the Montreal hotel incident he deliberately left out of his journals. During the final moments before the reflection disappeared, one of the figures inside the corridor had started moving toward him, not slowly, quickly, as though realizing he could see them. Months later, during a late-night train ride after several drinks, Houdini finally admitted the truth to Collins. The figure had been a woman, dark hair, light-colored clothing, and unlike every other person inside the reflections, she appeared frightened. Not of him. For him. Collins later claimed Houdini described her expression in a way he never forgot. The look of someone watching another person stand too close to the edge of something dangerous. Then, in July of 1926, another event changed everything again. A collector from Chicago mailed Houdini several photographs taken inside an abandoned estate scheduled for demolition. The house itself appeared ordinary: dusty furniture, cracked wallpaper, nothing unusual. But one photograph stopped Houdini cold. Visible in the background stood a large antique mirror manufactured in 1857, and inside the reflection, the room did not match reality. A doorway appeared inside the glass where no doorway existed in the actual room. At first, Houdini assumed damaged film, double exposure, some kind of darkroom mistake, until he examined the negatives personally. No tampering, no visible manipulation. And according to Jim Collins, Houdini stared at the photograph silently for nearly 10 minutes before finally whispering, "The mirrors are not malfunctioning." Then, after a long pause, "They are connecting." That realization changed the investigation completely, because once Houdini accepted that possibility, the mirrors stopped feeling mysterious. They started feeling dangerous. Within weeks, he canceled several private appearances without explanation. Instead, he traveled back toward Rhode Island, back to Providence, back to the coastal trade routes where so many of the mirrors first entered America during the mid-1800s. Because hidden inside one surviving shipping ledger recovered before a suspicious warehouse fire, Houdini discovered a location mentioned repeatedly beside imported mirror inventories. A coastal storage facility outside Newport, abandoned since the 1870s. The drive there unsettled Collins immediately. Fog rolled inland from the Atlantic in long pale waves, swallowing fences, trees, and sections of shoreline until the world beyond the headlights barely looked real anymore. And according to Collins, Houdini barely spoke during the entire drive. That frightened him, because the famous escape artist never stayed quiet for long. The warehouse stood overlooking the coastline several miles beyond Newport Harbor. Massive, abandoned, half-collapsed from decades of storms and salt air, yet faded lettering still remained visible above the entrance: Eastern Import Storage Co. The moment Houdini saw the name, he stopped walking. because it matched the shipping manifests connected to the mirrors. Inside, the building smelled of seawater and rotting wood. Broken crates lay scattered beneath collapsed rafters. Most had long ago been emptied. But deeper inside the warehouse, behind a rusted iron gate hanging crookedly from broken hinges, they discovered something unexpected. A second storage room. And unlike the rest of the building, this room appeared strangely untouched. Dust covered everything, but objects remained carefully arranged. Shelving units still lined the walls. Wooden inventory tags hung from rusted nails, and against the far wall stood several enormous objects hidden beneath dark cloth sheets. Mirrors, even before uncovering them, Collins knew. The air inside the room felt wrong somehow, heavy, still, as though sound itself moved differently there. Houdini uncovered the first mirror slowly. Tall, arched, dark walnut frame. A tarnished brass plate fixed to the back. 1854. Boston. The second mirror dated to 1861. The third 1857. All imported through the same company. And according to Collins, every mirror reflected the room slightly differently. Nothing dramatic, nothing impossible, but enough to make the human mind uncomfortable. The light appeared softer in one reflection, the shadows deeper in another, the perspective subtly altered, as though each mirror showed a slightly different version of reality. Then Houdini discovered the journals. Hidden inside a rusted metal cabinet beneath stacks of water-damaged invoices rested several leather-bound books wrapped carefully in oilcloth. Most pages had deteriorated beyond readability, but portions survived. The journals belonged to a man named Edwin Vale, listed repeatedly in shipping records as a supervisor for Eastern import storage between 1852 and 1868. At first the entries appeared ordinary. Cargo inventories, delivery schedules, weather conditions. Then slowly the tone changed. One surviving page dated October 1859 read, "Workers again reported altered reflections near dusk." Another entry, mirror number 14, covered after repeated disturbances among handlers. And another, partly destroyed by water damage. They said the figures inside seemed aware. Houdini reportedly reread that final line several times, because by then the phenomenon stretched back far earlier than he expected. Not isolated experiences after the Great War, not grief-driven hallucinations from mourning families. The reports existed before the Civil War had even begun, which meant someone had known about these mirrors for generations. Then Collins noticed something else. One final mirror stood apart from the others in the corner of the room. Larger, older, still completely covered beneath dark cloth tightly bound with aged rope. Unlike the others, no inventory tag hung beside it. No manufacturing plate. Nothing identifying where it came from. And according to Collins, the moment Houdini approached it, the atmosphere inside the room changed completely. The silence deepened. Even the sound of the ocean outside suddenly felt distant. Houdini untied the rope slowly. The cloth slipped downward, and beneath it stood the largest mirror either man had ever seen, nearly 8 feet tall, its frame carved with strange geometric patterns neither recognized. Not Victorian, not European, something older. The surface of the glass appeared unusually dark beneath the dim warehouse light. Then Collins noticed the reflection. The room behind them looked wrong, subtly wrong. At first he could not understand why. Then realization hit him. A shelf visible inside the reflection did not exist in reality. Neither did the doorway appearing along the far wall. Houdini stepped closer immediately. The reflection shifted slightly, not enough to call movement, but enough that both men saw it happen. Then somewhere deep inside the reflection, a figure moved, far away, crossing silently past the false doorway. Houdini froze completely. For several long seconds nobody spoke. The figure disappeared, but the doorway remained. Then Houdini whispered something Collins never forgot. "This one isn't showing memories." Collins asked what he meant, but Houdini kept staring into the mirror. Then finally, very quietly, he said, I think this one opens. That sentence terrified Jim Collins more than everything else combined, because the moment Houdini said it, the room no longer felt abandoned. It felt occupied. Collins immediately demanded they leave. And for the first time since the investigation began, Houdini agreed without argument. But before leaving the warehouse, he did something Collins remembered for the rest of his life. He carefully covered the mirror again, then nailed wooden boards across the storage room entrance from the outside, not to protect the mirrors from thieves, to keep people away from them. During the drive back toward Providence, Houdini barely spoke. Fog swallowed the coastline while dawn slowly brightened somewhere beyond the ocean. Then finally, just before sunrise, he quietly said, "I spent years exposing fake doors to the afterlife." Then, after a long silence, "But this may be a door to something else entirely." 3 weeks later, Houdini received another letter. No signature, no return address, only a single sentence typed across the center of the page. "You were never supposed to find the Newport mirror." That letter frightened him more than the reflections themselves, because it meant someone knew. Someone knew where he had gone. Someone knew what he had discovered inside that warehouse. And according to Collins, this was the point where Houdini truly became afraid. Not of spirits, not of mirrors, of people. Because once physical evidence started disappearing, the entire investigation changed. One evening in New York, Houdini reportedly spent hours inside the public library examining shipping archives from the 1850s and 1860s. Entire sections were missing, pages torn out, catalog numbers referencing files that no longer existed. At first, librarians blamed age and deterioration, but Houdini noticed something disturbing. The missing records consistently involved reflective materials, imported glass, northeastern ports, or companies connected to Eastern import storage. The pattern felt too deliberate to ignore. Then another discovery unsettled him even more. Several antique dealers he interviewed earlier in the investigation suddenly refused to speak with him anymore. One man in Boston denied ever discussing mirrors at all. A collector in Philadelphia abruptly canceled a scheduled meeting after receiving what he described only as an unpleasant visit. And Lucien Beauchamp, the antique dealer from Montreal, vanished completely. His shop closed without notice. Neighbors later claimed several men arrived late one evening and removed large covered objects from the building before dawn. After that, Lucien was never seen there again. That detail haunted Houdini, because up until then the mystery still felt distant. Now suddenly, people were disappearing, records were vanishing, and someone clearly wanted the investigation buried. Yet despite growing fear, Houdini could not let it go, because by then, he had already seen too much. Then in October of 1926, while staying at a hotel in Detroit during a performance tour, Houdini experienced the reflection again. Only this time, it lasted longer than ever before. According to notes later recovered from his trunk, the incident began shortly before sunrise. Houdini had placed a small antique mirror from Providence against the hotel wall facing east toward the window. At approximately 5:41 in the morning, the reflection changed. Not fragments, not distortions. An entire world appeared. The hotel room faded slowly until a vast city emerged inside the glass. Enormous white buildings glowing beneath pale morning light. Broad streets, stone terraces, water flowing beside walkways lined with trees. And unlike previous sightings, the people inside the reflection appeared close enough to study clearly. Men, women, children, dressed in light-colored clothing unlike anything common during the 1920s. Ordinary people living ordinary lives somewhere impossible. One woman carried books beneath her arm while speaking to a child beside her. Two men crossed a bridge in quiet conversation. Farther away, workers unloaded crates from a narrow transport vehicle Houdini did not recognize. But what frightened him most was not the people. It was the atmosphere. Everything appeared calm, peaceful, no smoke, no industrial haze. The city felt strangely balanced, as though it had been designed carefully instead of built through chaos. Later, Houdini wrote one sentence about what he saw. It resembled the future imagined by someone who still believed beauty mattered. For nearly 3 full minutes he watched the reflection, longer than ever before. And during those minutes, he became convinced of something impossible. The people inside the mirror were not echoes, they were alive. Then suddenly, one of them noticed him. A young boy standing beside the canal stopped walking, turned slowly, and stared directly outward through the reflection. The child looked confused, almost frightened, as though seeing Houdini was equally unnatural from the other side. Seconds later, an older man approached quickly and pulled the boy away from the canal path, urgently, protectively, and the moment that happened, the reflection destabilized violently. Light warped across the glass, the image blurred. Then the hotel room returned all at once, but not before Houdini heard something. A sound, faint, distant, like voices echoing across enormous open space. After that morning, according to Collins, Houdini looked physically shaken in a way he had never seen before. And for the first time since the investigation began, Houdini reportedly whispered words Collins never forgot. "I don't think they're dead." After Detroit, Houdini's notebooks changed completely. He stopped referring to the reflections as visions. Instead, he began writing about overlap. According to surviving fragments from his final journal, Houdini believed certain antique mirrors, a particularly mercury-backed glass manufactured before 1880, might under rare conditions allow temporary intersections between different realities, different worlds existing side by side. The theory sounded insane, even to him, yet no ordinary explanation fit anymore, especially because witnesses across America kept describing the same city despite having no connection to one another. And there was another detail Houdini could no longer ignore: the emotions people experienced during sightings. Witnesses rarely described immediate terror. Instead, they felt longing, recognition, sadness, as though the reflections awakened memories belonging somewhere deeper than ordinary thought. One widow reportedly told Houdini, "It felt less like seeing somewhere new and more like remembering somewhere forgotten." That line haunted him afterward, because by late 1926, Houdini himself had started dreaming about the city, not mirrors, the city itself. He dreamed of enormous white staircases, wide boulevards glowing beneath soft morning light, distant bells echoing across crowded plazas, and every dream carried the same disturbing feeling: recognition, as though part of him somehow already knew the place. Jim Collins later admitted Houdini became increasingly exhausted during the final weeks of his life. He barely slept, hardly ate, sometimes stopped speaking mid-conversation as though listening for something far away. And twice, Collins caught him staring silently into covered mirrors inside hotel rooms despite previously insisting they remain hidden. Then came the final notebook entry written only days before Houdini's death. The handwriting appeared rushed and uneven. Several lines had been crossed out repeatedly, but a few sentences remained readable. "The reflections are not showing the past. The city still exists somewhere. The people can sometimes see us also." And finally, one last sentence written darker than all the others: "Perhaps we are the lost world to them." After that entry, the note stopped completely. Then on October 31, 1926, Harry Houdini died. Officially, complications from a ruptured appendix ended his life. But almost immediately, rumors spread quietly through spiritualist circles, antique collectors, and paranormal researchers. Because according to Jim Collins, 3 days before Houdini died, he gave one final instruction regarding the Newport mirror, an instruction Collins refused to repeat publicly for decades. When he finally did, people understood why Houdini became truly frightened near the end. According to Collins, Houdini told him that if he ever encountered the reflection himself, he must walk away immediately. No matter what he saw, no matter who appeared inside it, When Collins reportedly asked why, Houdini answered quietly, "Because eventually, something inside may ask you to stay." That sentence terrified Collins more than everything else combined. Not because of the words themselves, because Houdini sounded absolutely certain. For years afterward, the trunk containing Houdini's journals remained hidden among old stage equipment in storage. And gradually, the world moved on. The Great Depression arrived, then another world war. Cities changed, buildings disappeared, families sold antiques during hard times, and over the decades the mirrors themselves became harder to trace. Yet the stories never fully vanished. In 1938, a widow in Baltimore reportedly described seeing white towers glowing inside an inherited mirror manufactured before the Civil War. In 1951, a collector in New Orleans claimed he heard distant bells while cleaning antique glass at dusk. And in 1967, a retired architect from Connecticut sketched part of a city skyline visible inside his reflection, before abruptly refusing further interviews. The sketches matched earlier descriptions almost perfectly. Domes, stone terraces, broad boulevards, and always the tower. But perhaps the strangest detail emerged years later when Collins finally agreed to discuss the Newport warehouse shortly before his own death in 1974. At first, he repeated only what people already knew: the mirrors, the reflections, the city. Then, after a long silence, he revealed something he had hidden for nearly 50 years. The final time they visited the warehouse, Houdini was not the only one who saw movement inside the large covered mirror. Collins saw it too. According to him, the figure standing beyond the false doorway appeared completely real. A man dressed in pale clothing beneath soft white light. And for several seconds, the figure seemed desperately trying to communicate something. Not threatening, not aggressive, urgent. Then Collins revealed the one detail Houdini never included in his journals. Just before they covered the mirror again, the figure raised one hand and pointed behind Houdini, toward the warehouse entrance. Both men turned instinctively. And according to Collins, for one impossible moment, the reflection no longer matched the room around them at all. The doorway behind them inside the mirror had vanished, replaced by darkness, not shadow, not absence of light, something deeper, something empty. That was the moment Houdini ordered the mirror covered permanently. Years later, Collins still believed they narrowly escaped something beyond human understanding. Not evil, not supernatural, just unknown in a way the human mind struggles to accept. And maybe that's why the story still lingers long after Houdini himself faded into history. Not because of ghosts, but because of the possibility that somewhere beyond ordinary sight, another version of life still quietly continues. A place where white cities still glow beneath soft morning light, where towers rise above silent boulevards, where people walk peacefully through another world, completely unaware they are occasionally being glimpsed through fading antique glass by strangers from somewhere else. And maybe, for brief moments at dawn or dusk, they see us too. If you enjoyed tonight's story, subscribe to Forgotten Echoes for more immersive historical mysteries and forgotten stories from the past. And before you go, tell me honestly in the comments, do you think the mirrors were showing memories, or something still alive on the other side of the reflection?